Okay, so welcome everybody. This is our
This meeting is being recorded.
that's our AI friend. Yeah. Anyway, this is our fourth session of existentialism, psychoanalysis, and anti-psychiatry, and our attempt to, if you will, synthesize or look at some kind of convergence of the three moments that could help in these very haunted and insane times, if you will. So we're going to talk tonight a little bit more about the Foucault interpretation. I ordered, I'll share this with you, the lectures Foucault gave at the University of Lille in Paris, excuse me, in Lille, France, above Paris, the working class university, on these issues of mental illness and psychology, and his early work with this fascination, if you will, of these matters. And I'll share with you if there's anything more there. To me, this is seminal in the development of Foucault. Like I said, he's 28. These are preoccupations of his in the beginning: madness, the prison, right, and sexuality through the three moments, etc. Um, and and then he goes on to defining himself as an anti-structuralist, even though he was considered part of the structuralist moment in order and things and words and things, a better translation, and then of course the archaeology of knowledge. We can go back to that. So I'd like to start with just a few passages, and maybe we can have a somewhat of a interaction tonight. I want to start with pages 67, 68, 69. And this is Sartre. He begins the thing. Yeah. The poet, the quote from Cocteau is the poet is part of the orders of the night. And he uses Cocteau to set this up, the night and the night dreams. We must reverse our familiar perspective. Strictly speaking, the dream itself, and remember we're dealing with a dream, does not point to an archaic image. So not an archaic image, a phantasm, or a hereditary myth. And you begin to see all this talk of dinosaurs and superhero movies and this kind of prehistoric, archaic past and how this is played out is very interesting here. The dream does not point to these things. So he's going to deal with the dream in a very different way, right? Its constituting elements, they're not its points, excuse me, that is not their prime matter, and they do not constitute its ultimate significance. On the contrary, every act of imagination points implicitly to the dream. The dream is not a modality of the imagination. The dream is the first condition of the imagination. All right. So this is very interesting. This is very similar to Freud. Let me get some chalk, right? So again. Or use Kantian language because Foucault really is ultimately very Kantian. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the imagination, right? Excuse me. Yeah. So going back to this, classically, the image, classically, can you let the person in? I'm sorry, I'm seeing it, yeah. Classically, the image is always defined by reference to the real. So you begin to see, and I'm going to kind of presage, if you will, a little bit of this by bringing in the Lacanian orders, the real, the imaginary, and the symbolic that we will go to later. So this theme, if you will, of the imagination is crucial to really grasp here. Imagination and dream, the imaginary order that Lacan will speak about, and its relation to the real. Foucault does not think there is this same kind of relationship. So you have the three orders in Lacan, and we'll go over this when we get to it. Three orders: the imaginary, the symbolic, and the real. These are just terms right now. We'll explicate those later. But again, there's a long history going back to Sartre, Bachelard, and of course, Binswanger and Freud. And you're going to see, I don't know if you were able to read this in its entirety, but you will see that Foucault basically supports Freud later on the imaginary. I'll read this passage. This is a very crucial part of this interpretation of the dream of Aby Warburg. So again, and we'll go, like I said, we'll go back to this. So anyway, the next passage, and I won't go through, I won't read it, but if you want to put in the margins, this is Sartre, how he sees his friend Peter, right? How he constitutes the image of Peter. And I'll just read one sentence here. Or else, it defines the essence of the image negatively, as in the Sartrean conception of an imaging consciousness that posits its object into real, right? It's an irreal object, irreality. On the one definition, as on the other, the image bears in itself and by natural necessity an allusion to reality, or at least to an eventual content of perception. No doubt, Sartre has amply shown that the content is not there. And remember, phenomenology is always suspending content, right? To get, again, to its model of the thing itself, right? So the content is not that. That indeed I aim at insofar it is absent. So this is the beginning of the absent present moment as well that you find in Sartre early on the imagination and the image. That it offers itself from the start as irreal, that it remains porous and docile to my magical incantations. Sartre had a great phrase. We'll see this in the section on bad faith, that the person in bad faith and what happens in terms of this kind of irreality is a magical transformation of the world. Yeah. I'm hearing myself. I'm very hoarse. Yeah. Can you let a person in?
Oh, yeah,
Sorry about that. I'm just noticing. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So the image of Peter is the perception of Peter evoked, but it takes place in, confines itself, and exhausts itself in the irreality where Peter presents himself as absent. So the absence of Peter is absolutely necessary for this image constitution, and also for a moment of reconstituting presence, if you will, right? Okay, yeah. So he asked himself, and again, this is a long dialogue. I'm sorry here. I mean, we don't have enough time. We could do a course on the image, the imagination, from Sartre, Bachelard to Lacan and beyond. Deleuze and Guattari are more about, but I have a great quote here tonight, which I think is very important for us on the left in terms of the radical imagination. We'll find it. And in the mode of unreality, the real itself. So I'm trying to imagine what Peter will do when he gets such and such news, the news of Peter. So this kind of pre-constitutive moment of when we're going to get to Peter here. This is a quote from Sartre, and I think it's from the imagination, if I'm not mistaken. What's the number of the footnote? I'm sorry that my eyes are very watering.
65.
65, yeah. Let me just see where that's from. Yeah. So yes, this is from the imaginary and also the psychology. I might be able to download the psychology imagination because the whole book is 250 pages just on the image. Okay, so it's very interesting what he does, image pattern, all this kind of stuff. So anyway, so I mean, in your spare time, I don't want to spend just reading aloud here. There are also many important. This is very important to see the interlocution with Sartre, right? And about presence and absence. So I'll put that as well on the board. You have the notion of inside and Foucault. Of I will have this right on. And then of the image. What happened?
I had to, no, it's okay.
Okay, okay. Says I'm always typing or just making
Yeah,
a noise.
yeah.
Okay, good. Okay. Anyway, so he'll go through many other things here, but I want to go down to the page. The dream of death, right? Page 68, bottom of the page, right? Dreaming is not a singularly powerful and vivid way of imagining. On the contrary, imagining, this is the last sentence of the middle paragraph. Imagining is to take aim at oneself in the moment of dreaming. It is to dream oneself dreaming. This is kind of interesting, right? And this is somewhat in Descartes. I'll bring the three dreams next week. I forgot. I'm sorry. It's been a bad couple of days. So anyway, yeah, think about this. Imagining oneself in the moment of dreaming, it is to dream oneself dreaming. So, and just as dreams of death appear to us to disclose the ultimate meaning of the dream, no doubt there are certain forms of imagination which link to death, show with the greatest clarity what at bottom imagination is. So I want to mention this too about Michel Foucault. One of his very forgotten is it should be not it should be remembered is an essay that he wrote on Raymond Roussel called "Death in the Labyrinth." It's a study of Raymond Roussel's both his poetry and his novels. Yeah, Death in the Labyrinth, right? Which is part of this later period right here in this early Foucault, if you will. Okay, that I derealize his presence of this to this very world, and I experience the world. Excuse me, not another one, but this very one is entirely new to my presence as world, which is only the cosmogony of my existence. This is Heidegger, by the way, the worlding, right? And this cosmon. Yeah, it's page 69, Josh. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. Through this world, which is only the contingency of my existence, and this is another term very, very crucial. I'll put it up to contingency and chance in Sartre and in Foucault. Right? So we're going to have the contingency. And the famous phrase, we'll see this in Being and Nothingness, we are condemned to freedom. Condemned. We're just not free. We're not just free in nature, like Rousseau. We are condemned to freedom. And this is a very interesting thing that he plays out in his plays, right? Very interesting, especially in the book called The Condemned of Altona, sorry. Again, okay, so very interesting. So it is to dream oneself dreaming. And just as dreams of death appear to us to disclose the ultimate meaning, no doubt there are certain forms of imagination which link to death, show with the greatest clarity, etc., at bottom what the imagination is. In the movement, it is always my sense, myself, that I derealize as presence to this very world, and I experience this world, not another one, but this very, as entirely new to my presence, as penetrated by my presence, as belonging to this is mine. I made a marginal note here for myself for whatever it's worth. Aristotle's notion of what philosophy begins with, wonder, Pharmatasine. You must be overwhelmed by wonder to exist at all, right? This is a very interesting moment that so many people, because of the dominance of the security principle, have forgotten, and forgetting the contingency and I guess the fragility of the existence really brings us to. Okay, so anyway, so through this world, which is only the cosmogony of my existence, Heidegger again, I can rediscover the entire trajectory of my freedom, fathom its every direction, totalize it as the curve of a destiny. This is obviously Heideggerian language, right? For those of you that know some Heidegger. When I imagine the return of Peter, to have an image of Peter, crossing the threshold is not essential. What is essential is that my presence, right, inclining to dreamlike ubiquity, spread itself out on this side and on that side of the doorway. He's referring to something I did not read about the keyhole, right? I won't go to Bob Dylan here about keyholes, but finds itself wholly in the thoughts of the arriving Peter, and to my own thoughts as I wait, in his smile and in my pleasure, aiming at the meaning at this meeting as a fulfillment. So he's speaking about intentionality, that you have to have a fulfillment of the intention, a Searlean moment that you intend an object in its direction and it must be fulfilled. If it's not fulfilled, etc., it's interesting. I remember the first time I ever heard Etienne Balibar speak at the New School many, many years ago. He came in and say, it's my intention and I hope I fulfill the intention. This is part of this language of the intentionality towards objects. Towards is the key term. Not of, right, but towards, right, objects, right? And how we constitute these objects and work with them, in our own day, in our own ways. So to dream like anyway, the imagination does not tend to hold the movement of existence, but this is interesting, to totalize it. So one could ask the question, since this group is called the Institute for Radical Imagination for many different reasons, right? Is the radical imagination really involved in a project of totalization, right? As much as we can. Or what, we try to work on convergence in philosophy, right? And of course, I'm very much into, after rereading Foucault, the in-between. What is the in-between? Beyond that of just simple Hegelian mediation. So we can speak to that too. All right. So one always imagines the decisive, the definitive, that which is thenceforth forward going to be closed, where the closure will be. When we imagine is on the order of a solution, not a task. This is interesting too, because Husserlian phenomenology, and to a degree Heidegger, and in my opinion Gramsci as well with his theories of praxis, are very task-oriented. They're not so much about, if you will, getting something done, finding a solution. That's not the idea. The idea is the task. And this is something very much taken away, at least from what I understand, of the contemporary therapeutic milieu. How it's no longer really task-oriented. Use a cliche, one step at a time, but a hard, concrete step, right? In a sense. And really, in a way, not to look at this as something that really treats victimization and trauma, but sets out the problematics of tasks, tasks to overcome. And I'm going to get us a case study. I'm going to use the Joel Cavell case study later in the semester. We'll read at least 2 case studies from the Age of Desire on someone, New York woman, who had a hard time getting herself to accept her freedom, right? It's a very interesting moment. And we'll speak about that, alongside existential psychoanalysis and other. What we imagine, happiness and unhappiness are ascribed in the imagination's register, not duty and virtue. This is interesting. Not obligation, and I hate this word virtue because it's Christianization of the Greek word arete, which really means excellence. Very, very important. I'm going to put this on the board because I think the translators of the future, just who do the Communist Manifesto, should also go back to Aristotle and use this term. Arete is excellence. Christians translated this as virtue. Excellence is much better. And for Aristotle, the health is living in accordance with the principles of the soul, right, etc. You have all kinds of things that are happening there too. So let me just go on. Yeah, that is why the major forms of imaginations are aligned with suicide. This is a very interesting take on Durkheim and also, if you will, on suicide in general, which is, out there all the time. I think there's a 1-800 number now for suicide watch, all kinds of stuff, right, out there. Or rather, suicide appears as the absolute of imaginary behaviors. Every suicidal desire is filled by that world, in which no longer be present here or there, but everywhere, in every sector, a world transparent to me and signifying its indebtedness to my absolute presence. This is beautiful, really. I mean, again, someone very serious at 28 years old. Suicide is not a way of canceling the world or myself, or the two together, but a way of rediscovering the original moment in which I made myself world, in which space is still no more than directedness of existence, and time the movement of its history. Very interesting, huh? Yeah. You want to say something? Yeah,
No,
yeah.
Just we should read that again.
Okay, yeah.
I
will.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Okay. Suicide is not a way of canceling the world, right, or myself, or the two together, but a way of rediscovering the original moment in which I made myself world, right? I am a world. This is a Welt, und, etc., a world in English, in which space is still no more than directedness of existence, right? No longer space as such, but directedness of existence, and time, the movement of that history. Yeah, this is very interesting, huh? Yeah. We can stop. To commit suicide is the ultimate mode of imagining. To try to characterize suicide in the realistic terms of suppression is to doom oneself to misunderstanding this. So page 69, if you want to make very crucial for, I think, a new way of looking at suicide. If you want to think about this, I'm certainly open to your thoughts here. Only in anthropology, of the imagination, can ground psychology and an ethics of psychology. Let us hold on for the moment only to the notion that suicide is the ultimate myth, the last judgment of the imagination, as the dream is the genesis, its absolute origin. Hence, one cannot define the imaginary as the inverse function, the negative index of reality. No doubt it develops readily on the ground of absence, and the gaps in denial by which it opposes my desires are above all what refer this world back to its basics. Yet it is also through the imaginary that the originary meaning of reality is disclosed. Therefore, it cannot exclude reality. At the very heart of perception, it can throw into bright light the secret and the hidden power at work in the most manifest forms of presence. To be sure, Peter's absence and my dismay prompt me to dream that dream in which my excellence gives forth to me, Peter. But in his presence, too, before that face which today I am reduced to imagining, I can already summon up Peter and imagination, not as elsewhere, but or as different, but there, where he was, just as he was. Interesting, huh? Thus Peter, who was seated there before me, is not imaginary, in that the sexuality may have duplicated itself and might have assigned me another. Virtual Peter, the Peter I hypothesize, desire, anticipate, but it is imaginary to that at this privileged moment he is for me precisely himself, Peter. He, it is towards whom I go, whose encounter promises me certain satisfaction. His friendship for me is located there. So you can see this whole development here within the Mitzvah, the relationship of the constitution of the ego and its other, if you want, and the constitution of world, right, as a precondition for understanding the world of imagination and also the self. So it's no accident that, in a way, for the sociologists in the group, the people that study George Herbert Mead, right, in a sense, that this language was used very eloquently in those kind of attempts. And Irving Goffman obviously takes this up in the Sartrean version in the presentation of self in everyday life. And his most Heideggerian book is Frame Analysis, in my opinion, which is not read at all. Goffman is not even assigned in a lot of the programs anymore. Yeah, even though he's talked about in the newspapers now. Yeah, right. And great movie by Frederick Weissman, his friend. Asylums and then the life of Goffman. Yeah,
Great.
So,
Yeah.
great film. Yeah.
Wait,
So
you mean the Follies? What's it called? Frederick Wiseman, the
Asylums, as well as as
Getting
well
That
as
Follies.
something on the like. Yeah.
Yeah, we had to read it in at UCS in frame analysis. That was a required text.
Good. That's why it was UCS. Right? Yeah. So anyway, it goes through Peter and the perception. The perception itself, while remaining perception, becomes imaginary. And the distinction again is being drawn between perception and imagination here, which is crucial for today. What are we actually perceiving in the world political scene? What are we imagining? What is the difference? And then he's going to go on to Freud in the next paragraph. So anyway, I'm going to go down, right? Gaston Bachelard, whose name I put on and I really recommend Right to Dream, Water and Dreams, The Psychoanalysis of Fire, all brilliant books, right, in a sense. The Poetics of Space, in which a lot of this is taken from, a phenomenal book, one of the most brilliant imaginative minds of the century. Yeah, I don't think he was on your list, right, Phil? Goffman was, though. Yeah. You're muted. You're muted, Phil. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, frame analysis was, but and there was another one that was assigned. I can't remember the title now, that we didn't, wasn't required, but another Goffman book.
Okay. Probably a presentation of self in everyday life, but maybe I'm wrong. There's certainly a lot. Yeah. Okay. So this is very interesting again. He's absolutely right when he shows the imagination at the work in the most intimate recesses of perception. Okay, again, this is a real exercise in philosophical thinking, right? The imagination and perception, right? The intimate recesses of perception and the secret labor which transforms the object one is perceiving into an object of contemplation, right? In a sense. One understands forms by their transformation, hence psychoanalysis of fire, right? Then beyond the norms of objective truth, the realism of unreality holds sway. No one has better understood the dynamic work of the imagination and the incessantly, vectorial nature of its movement. But we should also follow Bachelard when he shows this movement culminating in the image and the thrust of the image installing itself of its own accord within the dynamism of the imagination. So you're going to begin to see now he's going to make a move back to Freud, right, in the interpretation of dreams. And you begin to see his appreciation for this great text of Freud of 1900 as a founding document, if you will, of the psychoanalytic movement, right? So, on the contrary, versus Bachelard, right, in a way, the image does not seem to be made of the same stuff as the imagination. This is a radical statement. You know, it isn't imagination literally when you take the meaning, the process of imaging, right? He's taking this on in a very good way. The image which takes shape as a crystallized form and which almost always borrows its vivacity from memory does indeed play the part of a substitute for the reality, functioning as the analogon, which we earlier denied to imagination. Analogon is Greek for analogy, obviously. It's a term used actively by Plato throughout his work. When I imagine Peter's return, or what we shall first say to each other, I do not, strictly speaking, have an image, and what bears me along is solely the movement signifying this eventual meeting, whatever it may bring, that is an excitement or a bitterness, exaltation or dismay. But there's Peter all of a sudden, in image, in that somber attire and that lurking smile I know him by, right? Did this image serve to complete the movement of my imagination and fill it with what it was still lacking? Absolutely not, right? So this fulfillment is not there, right? In terms of the constitutive, power of imaging that we saw Tony last week and now he's here, et cetera. Do you really fulfill us now with your presence in a certain way?
Yeah.
And is this a part, if you will, of what, does the image of you complete this movement, right, of the imagination? Yeah, that processes. Absolutely not. They'd soon cease imagining, right? Even if it should persist for a while, this image does not fail to refer me sooner or later to my actual perception. So you begin to see this movement, and Patrick will understand this language, and I guess some other people, the pre-conscious, which is the place of imaging in Freud's topology of the mind, right? The perceptual, yeah, and the pre-conscious moment is where the images are produced, right? So, to those white walls around me that exclude the presence of Peter, the image is not given as the culminating moment of imagination, but at the moment of its alteration, change. The image means the presence of Peter. The imagination goes forth to encounter him. To have an image is therefore to leave off, right? To leave off imagining. I'll look at the French. I would figure that this really means relinquish. Yeah, I mean, I'll take a look. The image is impure and therefore precarious. Okay, so precarious imaging would be great as a book title going on about this precarious imaging, right? We talk about precarious labor, precarious imaging, right?
Yeah.
Right? Impure because always of the order of the as if. Yeah, of the as if. By the way, Freud uses the as if in his Future of an Illusion as one of the reasons that religion no longer holds. It's a philosophy of as if. It's a critique. He uses that phrase. The great book on this is Hans Weiniger, another German, right? They're everywhere. They're coming back with military now. Anyway, yeah, scary.
Yeah.
So the philosophy of as if you will. Yeah. And the other argument Freud has, I believe in God, because it's absurd, right? He has an argument from Tertullian, the church fathers, in a sense. But anyway, the as if, it will shape itself, and reification is basically as if, this is behind Lukács. He obviously develops it much more, but yeah, the as if. To a certain extent, it will shape itself within the movement of the imagination, which reinstates this very direction of existence, but it will feign an identification of these directions with dimensions of perceived space, and at this moment with the mobility of the perceived object. By presenting my meeting with Peter in this room in a conversation of such and such words, the image allows me to elude the real task in this world, real task, again, coming up, which I think is crucial for the therapeutic milieu today, to bring to light the significance of this encounter and the movement of my existence, what bears me toward it with such invincible freedom, right? That is why the as if of the image turns the authentic freedom of the imagination into the fantasy of desire.
Yeah.
This is very shrewd here.
Yeah.
You
So
know,
is that
he wasn't reading Lacan. It was 50 something. I mean, Lacan, had not become quote unquote Lacan.
yeah.
But you begin to see here. Yeah,
So
please.
you're saying there's a just a clarity. There's a moment of disjunction between the image and the imagination. And once that disjunction sort of becomes apparent, desire sort of enters the field.
It's certainly
Right?
a good way of looking at it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And mime's perception, as you just described,
Yeah.
as quasi-perception. Right? Okay.
Mhm.
To the image minus mime's freedom by a quasi-satisfaction
Yeah.
of the
Yeah,
desire.
there it is.
Okay,
Yeah.
very interesting here, right? Yeah. So I won't go much on this. Is again the reading of this section in Psychology of the Imagination of Sartre. This was Sartre in his 30s, when he wrote the Psychology of Imagination in the middle 30s. He had gone to study phenomenology with Husserl directly. He went to Germany, and then he came back and he started writing these very interesting, slow, right, studies of the imagination and the transcendence of the ego. So you can see how prominent Sartre was in discussion again during this period, right? And so the image is precarious. It completely exhausts itself in its contradictory status. So on the one hand, it takes the place of imagination and of that movement, which refers me back to the origin of the constituted world. At the same time, it points to this world constituted to the perceptual mode. Yeah, so it's very interesting. Again, this is why reflection itself, the act of reflection, kills the image. Right? Once we begin reflective mode, we're actually annihilating the image. Right? We're going there, right? Yeah. And which also does, whereas the one and the other reinforce and nourish, right, imagination. When I'm perceiving the doorway, I cannot have an image of Peter passing through it, and yet this room in which I find myself, with all that's familiar about it, with all the traces it bears of my past life and my projects, may ceaselessly assist me by its very perceptual content. It's imagining what the return of Peter and his reappearance in my life would mean. The image as fixation upon a quasi-presence is but the vertigo, this is a great phrase, the vertigo of imagination as it turns back towards the primordial meaning of presence. Yeah, pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. Turns back upon a quasi-presence is but the vertigo, right? Presence is but the vertigo of imagination as it turns back towards the primordial meaning of presence. The image constitutes a ruse of consciousness in order to cease imagining the movement of discouragement in the hard labor of imagining. Okay, so this is Sartre, section 8, right? A reading of the psychology of imagination, and also how, once again, the imagination has to be totally reconsidered, right? In the way we traditionally think about it, and also the relationship of image and imaging to perception, etc. So we're going to go on to the poetics, the next section, which I think Tony and other people there, I think all of us, poetic expression is the manifest proof of all this. So he's going to deduct here, right, in a very good way. It does not indeed find its greatest expansion where it finds its greatest number of substitutes for reality. So this whole notion of substitutive, notions of, metaphor, simile, et cetera, are thrown out, where it invents the most duplications and metaphors, but on the contrary, where it best restores presence in itself. Where the proliferation, this section 9 is crucial, of analogies well up, and where the metaphors, by neutralizing each other, restore the depth to immediacy. This is a great working model for the rule of metaphor. This is absolutely brilliant. The inventors of images discover similarities and hunt down metaphors, right? The imagination, to its true poetic function, mediates on identity. It is true that the imagination circulates through a universe of images. It does not move to the extent that it promotes or reunites images, but to the extent that it destroys and consumes them. Very important here, right? The imagination is, in essence, iconoclastic. It's always breaking up the tradition, the iconic, etc., right? In a sense, right? Metaphor, and this is a beautiful phrase too, very, very much worth thinking about. Metaphor is the metaphysics of the image. Yeah.
Wow.
Right?
In this sense,
Think about it. This is worth thinking about, really. I mean, to me, these kind of statements, right, that are in the text, and reading the parchment again, in the sense that metaphysics is the destruction of physics, which is about the laws of motion, right? Very interesting.
And the immediacy.
Right?
Not
Yeah,
the
exactly. Yeah. The true poet denies himself the accomplishment of desire to the image, because the freedom of imagination imposes on him as a task of refusal, right, etc. And I'll look up this. This is 60. What is it? 60 something there.
68.
68. I'm sorry. I'll look up who that is. René Char. And you should know this name.
Oh,
it was a great, an amazing poet. Yeah, French resistance fighter. He was, I think, in the French Air Force. He flew fighter jets right in the war. Right, René Char. Certainly worth reading. Yeah. Good friend of, unfortunately, sometimes those not of leftist political persuasion hang out with other kinds of people. Char was very close to Heidegger, another poet very close to Heidegger. Yeah, Heidegger really admired Char, and vice versa. Yeah, so yeah. So we go back to this. This is very good to my mind. So this is René Char, while carrying out the poetic task among the freshly cleared fields of the word, right? The felt, right? In its universality, the poet, integral with impressionable and plucky, I think it is, will never welcome any enterprise which might alienate the marvel which freedom in poetry is. Back to this concept of Thamatazain, to wonder, something we were very lacking in today. The criticism I always heard about Marxism when I was growing up, if you will, as a budding intellectual, it basically takes the mystery out of things. It always is looking for answers and solutions, right? And it didn't really have that opening in a sense. Yeah, something was missing in the poetics.
Right.
Yeah, very much so.
Right.
Yeah. Not again, Marx obviously had poetic flow. Yeah. But
time.
you have to think about this, though, is the mystery, if you will, or what we don't know, right? Right? Not really there, in a way. And I think this produces an incredible amount of, look, the anger and the exactitude on the left is well known, right? And it's critical force. At the same time, where is the imagination today? The best we're coming up is left Democrats, right? In some ways. where are we really going here? Yeah. And anyway, so let me go on. As measured by the interdestructive power of the image. And I mean, I'm trying to do this with Marx too. The image of Marx, right, is the way it's been created, right?
Yeah.
Maurice Blanchot, by the way, has a wonderful piece. I'll see if I can share it with you. It's called um, um, Four Images of Marx. A great writer, Maurice Blanchot. He was part of the Catholic, youth movement in France. Anyway, the four voices of Marx. Marx is polyvocality. So I'll send you this. It's a great piece. I think, Jeremy, you have a copy of it, I think, because I think we discussed it. Yeah. Anyway, he's doing something. Okay, so very interesting. Now we're going to begin. We're going to begin with the phantasmagoria. And this is a big topic in philosophy today, right? What is the haunted version, right? Right? What is really going on here, right? So exactly opposite, stands the morbid fantasy and perhaps even certain crude forms of hallucination. Now, here, the imagination is completely enmeshed in the image. Phantasms emerge when the subject finds the free movements of its existence crushed in the presence of a quasi-perception which envelops it and immobilizes it. I'll tell you a story to maybe illustrate this a little bit. I remember going to see the psychoanalyst that I had, a little bit of a relationship with many, many years ago. And I went back and said, I've been reading Heidegger, but I really find it difficult that he was hallucinating, during the Nazi regime, and this kind of brings it back home. This is the structure of hallucination, and of course, the analyst said, "Who said he was hallucinating?" So it's a kind of interesting moment, in terms of the paradox of both the hallucination and following, in leadership. The slightest effort of the imagination stops and is sucked into the image, right? As it is falling into its direct contradictory. The dimension of the imaginary has collapsed. The patient is left only with the capacity to have images. Now, I suspect all of you were able to read, since we're in the fourth week, the dream, right, itself, the analysis of Warburg's dream, because he's making a comment here about what happened to Warburg, right? The patient is left only with the capacity to have images all the more forceful, or the more tightly knit, as the iconoclastic imagination is alienated in them. Phantasms cannot be understood, therefore, in terms of imagination deploying itself, but only in terms of imagination disenfranchised. This aim of psychotherapy should be, and this is something very interesting, the aim of psychotherapy should be to free the imaginary that is trapped in the image. And I think this is very, very crucial. It's, again, one of those pearls that sometimes Foucault comes up with. Yet, on the other hand, not so fast as Aronowitz used to say, yet as difficulty arises in this moment, right? One which is all the more important for us since it touches upon our main theme. Is the dream a rhapsody of images, which we like to think it is when we have good dreams, right? Bob Dylan, and you can be in my dream if you want to be in my dream, etc. And I could be in your dream. If it is true that images are but the imagination alienated, deflected in its undertaking, alienated in its essence, our whole analytic of the dreaming imaginations is threatened by this very fact, right? So it's, again, anticipating the criticism of this, right? In a sense, right? The disenfranchised thing. But were we in fact justified in speaking of dream images? No doubt we become conscious of a dream only by way of images and starting from there. Yet in themselves, they are only given fragmentarily and choppily. First, I was in the forest, then I was at home. To be sure, as everyone knows, I suddenly interrupt a dream, always ends on a thoroughly crystallized image. Very interesting too. Far from proving that the image makes up the weave of the dream, these facts, right, show only that the image is a viewpoint on dream imagination, right? A way for waking consciousness to retrieve its dream features. In other words, during the dream, the movement of imagination is directed towards the primary moment of existence where the original constitution of the world is achieved. Again, this is phenomenological approach to, if you will, the unconscious and dreaming. If you will, if you presuppose the existence of the unconscious, this is a phenomenology of the phenomena called dreaming in the unconscious and trying to get to the essence of dreams, if you will. An essence in the German sense of the becoming, not to essentialize it. Yeah, this is very important, again, to work with. The German term for essence that's translated into English is Werden. It's an active, it's a becoming essence. It's not essence itself. It's not fixed. Now, when trying to grasp this movement, right, within the constituted world, waking consciousness provides it in the lines of an almost perceived space as coordinates and presses it towards a quasi-presence of the image. In short, the authentic current of the imagination is reversed against the dream itself. Images are put in place. Now, this is the important shift here because he's going to go to Freud, right? And again, with and against Binswanger, but really with Binswanger in a sense. For the rest, the genius of Freud bears witness to this state of affairs, since he sensed clearly that the meaning of a dream was not to be sought at the level of image content. Better than anyone, he understood that the phantasmagoria of the dream, but more that it revealed, and that it was but a compromise permeated by contradictions. But the compromise is not an effect, and this is important, the repressed and the censor, because most people read dreams that in terms of repression and the censor will let in and will not be let in. Now we censor many images and things, right? Between the drive, I'll retranslate instinctive, it's drive, right? And instinctive drive impulses and the perpetual material. It is between the authentic movement, again, of the imaginative and its adulteration, right, in the image. Very interesting again. And if the meaning of the dream is always beyond the images gleaned upon waking, this is not because they will veil hidden forces, but because wakefulness can reach the dream only mediatedly, and because between waking image and dream imagination, the distance is great between quasi-presence in a constituted world and original presence as, a whole world being constituted. So you begin to see the merger here in some ways of a Sartre and a Freud, right? And certainly what is going to go on with Binswanger. Analysis of a dream from the images supplied by waking consciousness must precisely have the goal of bridging that distance between image and imagination, or if you want or will, of effecting the transcendental reduction of the imaginary, right? How do we get, again, to this transcendental reduction of the imaginary? This is the step, in our view, Binswanger took concretely in Dream and Existence. So this is the task before Binswanger and his legacy, if you will, in this piece, right? And it is essential that this transcendental reduction of the imaginary ultimately be one and the same thing as the passage. And remember where we started with this, in an anthropological analysis of dreams to an ontological analysis of imagination. I'll repeat that. To an anthropological analysis of dreams, right? To an ontological analysis of the imagination. Thus is the passage from anthropology to ontology, which seems to us from the outset the major problem of the Dasein analytic, or what we call the existential analytic in Heidegger's Being and Time, right? Yeah. Which, right, actually accomplished, right? So it's very important. This is the birth, if you will, in my opinion, of a justification, if you will, of the existential analysis, right? As to work both alongside, right? And to supplement, if you will, psychoanalysis, but at the same time, understand a little bit of its differences. And where the quote that we began this course with between Binswanger and Freud, it'll take 300 years for us to resolve our difficulties. So we'll keep that in mind as we go forward, right? So anyway, this is a very crucial ending, if you will. I won't read any more. He'll go on to the image unless you want to talk about this. I'm beginning to read Capital as a Gothic novel in a different way. Yeah, so I'm starting, I'm thinking about this now. I know people read it with Dante's Inferno. I think it's much more a Gothic horror show. I always said Marx had the greatest black humor of anybody in the 19th century. I mean, it was great black humor, right? Going to the market to get a tanning. There's so many beautiful metaphors in Marx, that go on. So anyway, I think this is very interesting because he's covering so much the metaphor, right? Of course, a similarity, in terms of simile, etc. And at the same time, looking at the rule of metaphor, and in some ways, metaphorein, it really means transference in a way. Yeah, it's the metaphoric energy in the psychoanalytic session that really is part of the transference.
Yeah.
It's not only reflected, it's the metaphoric energy that really produces a lot, at least in my mind. And we can read this later because, again, Josh and I are going to do something on the anti-Oedipus. Guattari has a great thing of what constitutes a good therapeutic session. And I think this is very important. It's actually from Andre Green, a Lacanian, who wrote a very good book on the tragic effect, by the way. He had a falling out with Lacan, as did many. But anyway, this is important and to know, not the jock. Okay, so anyway, any thoughts or commentary? The imaginary is the milieu, the last sentences on page 75, the element of this choice, right? He's going in, the anthropology of expression, which would be more fundamental on page 74 than an anthropology of imagination. We do not propose to outline it here, but this is Foucault at work, trying to do, if you will, a kind of very radical philosophical anthropology. Yeah. And I mean, Patrick knows, again, he studied Delphi and others, how much of these new things were going on in Germany, the creation of new disciplines, new fields, the arguments that went on. So Foucault, in some ways, is doing a kind of phenomenological anthropology here, in some ways, right? And then he, the ends of man is where he ends up with it anyway. What is brought to light regarding dreams is the fundamental moment where the movement of existence, bottom of 74, discovers the decisive point of bifurcation, again, between those images in which it becomes alienated in a pathological subjectivity. Yeah, you want to read the chat, and then expressions in which it fulfills itself to an objective history, right? The imaginary in its milieu, the element of this choice, therefore, by placing at the heart of the imagination, right? In the meaning of the dream, we can restore the fundamental forms of existence. Very interesting, right? And one can reveal its freedom. And again, this is going to be a crucial term in Sartre, right? Yeah. And one can also designate its happiness and its unhappiness, since the unhappiness of existence is always writ, right, in alienation, and happiness in the empirical order can only be the happiness of expression. Okay, so that's where he ends this piece, this commentary, the hyphen analysis of Binswanger's reading of the dream of Aby Warburg, etc. And he begins, of course, if you turn to page 81, unless you want to stop here for a second and discuss some stuff. Tony, you have any thoughts about it? I mean, we went through a lot of dense material here, or Josh, or anybody on the screen. forth. You want to read the chat for me? Yeah.
Hmm?
Is the chat open?
Yeah, it was somebody sent a French translation
Or Foucault?
of something.
Oh, good.
What was it? Jamie, you sent something? Let's see.
Yeah, that was me.
What was it? I can't really see.
It, well, it is a link to the entire article we just finished in the French language original, and a little pull quote there. We talked about how, if you have the phrase "to have an image is therefore to leave off imagining," how was "leave off" rendered in the original French? You see there, the verb was renoncer.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Okay,
Mm.
good. Okay, good. No, thank you for that.
Impulse that we were looking at a moment ago is impulsions.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
not quite drives, something.
The impotence of the impotent
Yeah.
drive. Yeah.
Anyway, enjoy.
I know. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah. 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 So any other thought? You have any thoughts here before we go on to the dream itself? And yeah. And some of the things here that he's talking about. Again, you get a sense of the level of education of these people,
Yeah.
right? I mean, as I mentioned last week to you, I think Charles Barkley, the sports commentator, ex-basketball NBA star, said about Victor Wembanyama, right? The Wemby, who's taking the world by storm right now, French, 7'4", great player. He had a great retaliation in the game last night. Yeah, he came back from being suspended. Well, but anyway, Charles Barkley said he speaks so well. All our athletes should go to France to go to school, right? So it's kind of funny hearing this from a guy from Alabama, black guy from Alabama, who's a star and very funny guy, Charles Barkley. But anyway, ran for Congress. He lost. Yeah, but anyway, yeah, he'd be good at Congress. He'd be a real card. Yeah. Anyway, okay. So you want to say anything? I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit of flashes from this, this. Right.
From the
Anyway,
did you
yeah,
take
from
medicine?
reading Foucault. I haven't
Oh,
taken
okay,
any
yeah,
medicine.
yeah.
I'll go get some Claritin and I guess we'll do it. Yeah,
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah. I stopped on the road. One pill of Claritin, $7 at the roadside start.
Jesus.
One little pill of Claritin. Can you imagine? Yeah, $7. One pill. I needed it, so I had to pay. Yeah, in a way. Yeah. Anyway, so okay. Let me go on to dream and existence,
Okay.
if you don't mind. You
Yeah.
you can always reread this. It's not like we I'm not
Yeah.
I'm not in a hurry, as you know, right? In a way, I mean, in some ways, yeah, not in a hurry at all. Okay, above all, yeah, I mean, I always reminded myself, if I'm not, Western man plunges headlong into the abyss, rapidly, headlong into the abyss. So really, the idea, slow down, slow down here, yeah, okay. So above all, we must keep firmly in mind what it means to be a human being. Soren Kierkegaard. Now, of course, this is an attack, if you will, or a comment on what Kierkegaard said about Hegel. The Hegelian system did everything, right? It left out one thing, man, or the human being, right? Yeah. So, of course, all the Hegelian scholars go back trying to locate man, like the students in Germany when looking for the categorical imperative of Kant in the bushes. This is what happens in philosophy, right? Anyway, yeah. When we are in a state of deeply felt hope or expectation, and when if we hope for proves illusory, then the world in one stroke becomes radically different, right? So he begins with this kind of, if you will, alienated stroke, right,
Yeah.
early on. We are completely uprooted and we lose our footing in the world. When this happens, we may say later, after we have regained our equilibrium, that it was as though we had fallen from the clouds, right? Okay, so with such words, we clothe our experience of a great disappointment in a poetic simile that arises not from the imagination or any one particular post, but out of language itself. In this respect, language is every man's spiritual homeland. And you begin to see the influence again, from Heidegger to Lacan, yeah, in many ways, right? For it is language that poetizes and thinks together, right? Poetizes and thinks. For all of us, before any one individual beings, it to the service of his own poetic and thought-provoking powers. But now, what are the poetic simile? Is it a matter of an analogy in the logical sense or a pictorial metaphor in the poetic sense? And you begin to see why Foucault spends time, again, on metaphor and simile, right? In his commentary, right? To think either is utterly to bypass all an understanding of the inner nature of poetic similes. This is a kind of interesting thing. The inner nature of poetic similes. And again, for this nature lies, in fact, behind that to which logic and contemporary theories of poetic expression refer. The nature of poetic similes lies in the deepest roots of our existence, where the living spiritual form and the living spiritual content are still bound together.
Yeah.
And of course, he's using the word Geist, which is very different in English with spirit, right? In French, it's got a more playful meaning, esprit, right? This is Geist. When to a bitter debate, we fall from the clouds, but we do fall. Such falling is nearly purely of the body, though it's something analogically or metaphorically derived from physical falling. Our harmonious relationship with the world and the men about us suddenly suffers a staggering blow, right? Stemming from the nature of bitter disappointment and the shock that goes with it. And again, I just want to mention here, I'll see if I can find it online. I think I shared it. Josh, you may have a copy of this when I did this Darkness at Noon, Leftist Melancholy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wrote something about the left's inability to mourn.
Yeah.
To me, this is a very real thing that's going on. The incapacity at certain times.
Mhm.
We got let's organize, always the thing. Let's go to the protest on the weekend and give up our recreational time. Right?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's pretty absurd when you begin to really think about it, what we do,
Mhm.
instead of really thinking about what's been lost, what is to be regained, and where do we go? I mean, in a sense, to think it through.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm all for action in the world. Don't hear me wrongly, but
It's like a phobia.
yeah, it's phobia
Yeah.
that cannot be confronted in
Yeah.
some ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in such a moment, our existence actually suffers. It's torn from its position in the world and then thrown back on its own resources. And I like this. Until we can again find, right, a new, free, firm standing position in the world, our whole Dasein, and Dasein is being used here not as being there, but as existence, moves within the meaning matrix of stumbling, sinking, and falling. And I like this phrase too for research heuristic purposes, if you will. The meaning matrix, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, I think more closely to the German, it's a referencing matrix, but stumbling, sinking, and falling, right? If we call this general meaning matrix the form and the bitter disappointment, the content, we can see that in this case, form and content are one.
Yeah.
Okay? And of course, these debates are going in terms of many schools of linguistics at this point, at this time, right? The Copenhagen School, Raymond de Saussure, who was part of the Freudian movement, his brother, of course, Ferdinand de Saussure, who was very important to the structuralist project course in general linguistics, Jensleff in Eastern Europe, and many other people that are contributing to this form content moment, including Vygotsky, thought and existence in the Soviet Union. Very important thinker. I'm sorry, Arto, he's in Bulgaria. I think I can announce it that he's in Bulgaria. Anyway, it's a shame. It's I think about 3 a.m. from him, but he wrote on Vygotsky actively early on, so that'd be great. Maybe I can get him to come in, at one session and do something with that. Okay, so there are those who do not concern themselves with man as a whole, and this is crucial again, to take the totality of the being, the wholeness of existence, the the full person, just not the drives and desires, of the person, right? Take the whole person into account here. He's trying to develop this, right? Right again. But see, only one aspect of it, as biologists do, when they do with man only as a living organism. And those of you that have read Being and Time, again, Heidegger, one of the sub-disciplines, and I mean that literally, is biology.
Yeah.
Because it only treats living organisms. I mean, they'll get an argument
And the
from
science.
some of the people, but it's still part of,
Yeah.
the scientific project,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so such observers will say that falling, the high-low vector, is rooted purely in the living structure of the organism. And we see this today. Everything is neurological.
Yeah, I saw
That's all we get. Yeah.
there's a book about how to tame your amygdala.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Medulla.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your amygdala. Everything starts there.
The thallus.
Yeah, the thalamus.
The thalamus.
Hypothalamus.
Right, the
all that.
hypothalamus. Right.
Yeah, this is a
Interesting.
self-help book that I saw the other day.
Okay, well, yeah, there's a lot of self-help out there. People want fast solutions, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, anyway, bitter disappointed, but it's coming by deficiency of muscle tone and tension in the striated muscles, so that we are not apt to swoon or sink. Language, they say, is only a reflection of these purely physical circumstance, right? According to this view, our falling from the clouds or giving way of ground beneath our feet is a purely analogical or metaphorical transference of one state of affairs from the sphere of the body to that of the mind. And within the latter, it is simply a picturesque form of expression. Right, without genuine content, substance, a mere shape of speaking, a fashion of speaking. Façon de parler, right? Clause's theory of expression goes deeper. He's going to go in with some of his colleagues, etc. But you can see what he's setting up here, right? Again, wants to deal with the entirety, the full person in its totality. Once again, not just you had problems of trauma with your, family romance, if you will, right? This is an attempt to go well beyond her family romance, right, in a sense, or primal scenes, if you will, right? What does that ultimately mean to Binswanger? It's, you want to look at a greater totality, something that is going to yield something very different. Okay, so let me just go on, because my views are in line with Husserl and Heidegger's doctrine of meaning, which Karl Loveth is the name of the person, Husserl is applicable to the particular problem of the language that concerns us here. Where, for example, we speak of a high and low tower, a high and low tone, high and low morals, right? High and low spirits, which is involved as metalinguistic, carrying from one sphere of being to the others, but rather a general meaning matrix. Okay, again, general meaning matrix, in which the particular regional spheres have equal share, which contains within this same particular specific meaning, spatial, acoustic, spiritual, and psychic, sinking or falling, thus represent a general meaning matrix, a vector meaning pointing from above to below, which contains a particular existential significance for our design. According to the ontological existential, and this is his phrase, and it's in quotation mark, of, say, the extending and turning outwards of spatiality, the being thrown of mood. This is Heidegger's thrownness, Gewortheit, and then you're thrown and cast into a world to Bestimmung, right? That basically you're attuned to the world. Very, very, in some ways, Heidegger for his lack of musical education. He listened to some things, used a lot of language from this
Yeah.
through sound. He's very interested in sound and meaning, right? Or the interpretation of understanding. In bitter disappointment, the ground gives way under, or we fall from the clouds, and not because disappointment or shock represent, as Wundt said. Wilhelm Wundt is the father of modern psychology. An aesthetic affect that in the form of physical staggering, stumbling, or falling, i.e., vertigo, if you want to think of it that way. No? What's up? What? Oh, yeah. Yeah, is he here? Yeah, okay.
No, he's here.
Okay. Reveals itself as a threat to the upright bodily posture and thus serves, a real physical model for poetically imaginative language. It is rather the language of itself in this simile grasps hold of a particular element lying deep within the being of man's ontological structure, namely the ability to be directed from above to below, and then designates this element as falling. Appeal to aesthetic affect and its bodily expression need not be made. I would rewrite this in the context, I mean, this is just me, of course, I'm just speculating here, but I would write this, revolution from below. Forget the above and the belower, right, in a sense.
Mhm.
Think about what's coming up from below. And this is always a problem that we have with phenomenology. These are always dealing with the transcendental, right, in a sense. That's where they are. Even though many structuralist Marxists, such as Althusser, was very, very schooled in this, very actively. He told Tron Bacteau, we are all transcendental egos, based on our intersubjectivity and our ability to, basically communicate with each other, et cetera. It's very, very interesting on this. But anyway, I would look at this too. The ability to be directed from above to below, I would also add to this from below to above, if you will, and thus designates this element as falling, right? You may be fallen already. And to go back to the class argument, if you want to bring this in for Sean and what we're doing with Marxism and psychoanalysis, very, very important. Appeal to aesthetic affect and bodily expression need not made. What does need to be explained is why being disappointed as such has an aesthetic character, and the answer that in disappointment our whole existence no longer stands upon firm but upon weak legs, and indeed no longer even stands, because its harmony with the world has been rent, right, or ruptured, if you want. The ground beneath its feet, have been taken away, leaving it suspended and hovering. Now, such hovering of our existence need not necessarily assume a downward direction.
Yeah.
This is interesting. It can also signify liberation and the possibility of ascending. And this is good. I mean, This is where part of the promise, if you will, of phenomenological psychology and phenomenological. This is part of its promise, right? Yeah. Liberation is not just from repression and sexual repression and being able to deal with libidinal economies. This is interesting. Signify liberation and the possibility of ascending. But if it persists as disappointment, then our hovering passes into tottering. This is where most of the institutions are. They sentence me to 20 years of boredom, Leonard Cohen, for trying to change the systems of work. My case, 40 years. So Leonard's got nothing on me. I have a deeper, I'm just kidding. But anyway, making falling language, capitalize, the imagination of the poet, and above all, the dream, right? So he's going to go back here, draw from this essential ontological structure. Though our way of thinking is not popular among psychologists and psychiatrists, I wonder why, it is becoming progressively more clearly delineated in the philosophical movement of which I just referred. So this is the time where philosophy really had something to offer, right, if you will, this real change from the Kantian, neo-Kantian traditions of the 19th century, that Husserl and Heidegger, often something again, about Erfahrung and Erlebnis, lived experience and objective experience, and how do we get to these notions. And one thing we're lacking too, as Adorno very well no, the negative dialectic is to get us back to experience. That's the push, is ultimately to regain subjectivity that has been stolen from us by the system, etc. I mean, it's more complicated, of course. I mean, I read negative dialectics as the accounting system of Heidegger, the concepts and categories and how they borrow from each other. It's an interesting, the way of looking at it, So anyway, I want to go on here. From this point of view, the most questionable and of the many questionable problems that have puzzled that age is the relation between body and soul. Okay. We do not essay a solution to the problem, but rather by attempting to remove it from a hoary metaphysical and religious rut. And I like this. This is language of Cornell West in some ways, right? A hoary and religious rot, right? By doing away with such formulations as interactionism, parallelism, and identity, we wish to show it has been erroneously conceptualized. And this is part of what happened in identity politics, to my mind. This is basically the structure of identity politics. Only then can the way lie open for the treatment of such individual problems of anthropology as that which concerns us here. Now, remember, his patient here, Aby Warburg, is a cultural anthropologist, right? Who's been working with the Pueblo Indians, is having these dreams of everything from swastikas to serpents, etc. So that disappointment, as his president phrases, falling from the clouds based on further essential grasp by language, our outlook is said to be clouded. I'm confused. I'm clouded. I'm not clear, right, etc. Right? By passionate hopes, wishes, and expectations, so we say when we are happy, that it's like being in heaven. Anyway, right? The outlook is to be a passionate over in heaven, that is being in heaven. But falling itself, and of course its opposite, rising, are not themselves derivable from anything else. Here we strike bottom ontologically, right? From the abyssal plane, if you will, from the Abgrund. Again, and this goes back. Remember, many of you here have heard about the 1929 encounter between Ernst Cassirer and Martin Heidegger on the thing in itself. And Heidegger actually worked from the bottom up, from the Abgrund, whereas Cassirer was working more from the Kantian imagination. And this actually helped Heidegger's currency, if you will, during the time, 1929 in Davos. This is 1930. So this is a movement that's taking Europe by storm. And I told you the story of one of the immigrants that came to the United, Herbert Spiegelberg. He wrote the great 2-volume history of the phenomenological movement. So when you would see him in person, I saw him twice, you'd always say something nice to him about his work. He'd say, out of date, it was yesterday. He goes on, and, because he's doing reductions in his head, constantly trying to get to the phenomena at hand. All right, so anyway, the same basis for rising and falling as or our design is to be found in all religious, mythical, and poetic images of the ascension of the spirit and the earthly weight of the body, or pull of the body. So I recall Schiller's welcome, wondrous image of the transfiguration of Heracles. Right? I don't know if you know that, but it's very interesting. He had the poem here. He flows upward, and the heavy dreamlike image of earthly life sinks and sinks and sinks. Right? Interesting, right? Yeah. But if we wish to say, in fact, that this we is happily ascends or unhappily falls, that we find ourselves somewhat embarrassed for an answer. We're told that it simply means that we human beings and other further questions are redundant. Do we fall? Do we ascend? Are we knocking on heaven's door? Are we not knocking on heaven's door? Are we living in a chaotic, totally confused hell with in the Trumpocene? etc. Where are we in the world, right? And and how does chaos play out constantly? Yeah. So anyway, I want to go back a little bit down because I don't want to, I don't know if we're going to be able to get through all of this tonight. The question as to the who of our design, about 10 lines down, 12, 15 lines down, right? The question as to the who of our design cannot be answered by reference to a sensory perception of the isolated form, which remains unessential, but only by reference to something that can serve as the subject of the particular structural moment, in this case, the aspect of rising and falling. And the subject may well be, in its sensory aspect, excuse me, an alien external subject. It is nevertheless I who remain the primal subject, right? The who, right, versus the what, right? In a sense, right? Yeah. The truth, value, and much of the effect on us, the presentation of the subject of Dasein and myth, religion and poetry is based on these correct ontological insights. We shall now pursue our theme by simultaneously, and this is the first early moment you retain, right? This is primary for good reading, the retention, right? And if you remember, Stiegler, retention, protension.
Yeah.
Now we're in the protentive, right? With the retention going on, right? So retention of the subject, of the falling, the plunging, or sinking. So he goes on first to, and I don't know Painter Knowlton. Josh, you know Painter Knowlton?
No.
No? Okay. Very unexpectedly was ashamedly reproached by one when he deeply respected. At this suddenly experienced the most cruel shock that a person can experience. Reaching the point, the poet breaks off the direct description of his hero mental state and turns directly to the reader, who then hears himself addressed in the following way. In such a state, it is deathly still within you. You see your own pain like a boldly soaring bird of prey, stricken by a thunderbolt, and now slowly falling from the sky and sinking half dead at your feet. Yeah. So here, the unique poet speaks rather than language as such, though at the same time he is drawn upon as an essential tendency in language, falling in the same way that is being used by the corresponding essence of the being of man. So again, reflection on what is language, in this ontological structure, right? Okay, so then he goes in the pain and thing. I want to get a little bit to, on page 87 is the first grade. Anybody want to comment on this? So I had a chance to read it. Yeah. He has the first dream that he's going to analysis. Last night I found myself in Glotfelden, page 87, right? Yeah. That you had flowed shimmeringly and joyously by the house, but I saw it flowing in the distance as it really does, right? We stood by an open window looking out upon the meadows. There a mighty eagle flew back and forth through the ravine. As it flew towards the slope and settled upon a withering vine, my heart began to pound strangely. I think I was moved by the joy of seeing for the first time an eagle in free flight, right? Then it flew close by our window, and we made a point of noticing it bore a crown upon its head, and that its pinions and feathers were sharply and marvelously scalpeled, right? As they are upon a coat of arms, right? We sprang, my Oheim and I, to our to our rifles on the wall, and posted ourselves behind the door. So they go for the guns, right? The giant bird came right through the window and nearly filled the whole room with a breath of the image, right? We fired, and upon the floor laid not an eagle, but pieces of black paper piled up in a heap, right? This vexed us considerably, confused us. How do you get from the killing of a bird of prey
Mhm.
Right? And to black paper piled up in a heap. Right? What does this signify? So yeah. So then December 3rd, the second dream. Last night I dreamed of a kite. And it's very good to record your dreams. I'm having very strange dreams, but I find in the moment, it's very important to write them down and try to do a self-analysis, if you will, or also indicate what is the objective meaning that's coming back to us. This is good. You keep your own, the dream book, the reference book, the book of wasted souls. I keep this about me, the red book, everybody that's saved, the green book, a little bit of hope. The ecological movements, some of the anarchists, etc. And then, of course, the Black Book, who all go to the guillotine. Right. But anyway, yeah. I mean, I have in a way, not bad sadistic quality, but sadistic revolutionary quality, right, in this way. Yeah, in some ways. All right. So anyway, so the neighbors with their children, they're coming towards us, flew an enormous, wonderful, beautiful kite, the kite dream there, right, above the rooftops. Actually, it merely gilded, for its wings were tightly closed, and it seemed sick and emaciated by hunger, in that it sank lower and lower and could raise itself again only by great effort, right, but never as high as it was before it began to sink. The neighbors and the children shouted in order to chase it away. It saw me, and it seemed, in its upward and downward movements, to want to come near me. At that, I hastened to the kitchen to get some food, right, for it. I found Lysenko come hurrying back. It was already lying dead upon the ground and was in the hands of a vicious little boy, right, who ripped the magnificent feathers from the wings and threw them aside, and finally, tired of this, hurled the bird upon a dung heap. Right? The neighbors who had had felled with the bird with a stone, had in the meantime dispersed and gone about their business. This dream made me very sad. So these are the two dreams he's going to spend the next multiple pages on, etc. The bird and the prey. This goes on in the second section. I don't know. Any thoughts from you guys? I'm sorry, I'm just getting more and more congested as I speak. Yeah. Any thoughts about this? I mean, this is magnificent work. I mean, this is really, really reading. Almost poetically case studies. In a sense, with incredibly rich interpretations. From Nietzsche's birds of prey to the killing of the birds of prey, to the element, what is the symbol of American imperialism, to put it in communist terms, right? It's the eagle. Yeah. Anybody ever seen a bald eagle? I saw a bald eagle in Quebec. I loved it. I saw how it swooped down. Absolutely magnificent. Yeah. I mean, the species yeah.
You can see them at the train station at Peekskill when the water ice is over.
Okay.
They always congregate on I don't know what you call it. It's those aggregates of ice when it's partially frozen over.
Right.
They're incredible.
Okay. So next time I come visit you, I'm going to take the train to Peaksville in the winter.
Well, you pass it. You just got to look out the window and you catch them.
Well, I want to go see them closer.
Well, I don't know if they'll stick around for you, but we'll see.
This phenomenology, put in a window, be in the reality of the.
All right.
Yeah.
Many have crossed the border and they're living in Canada.
Yes. And they get through it, huh?
It's a good place to view them. If you want to see a lot of them, I can recommend several places for you to visit.
Outside Quebec City, in the eastern part of Quebec, but where you are, it's even better.
Yeah, Brackendale. Got to go to Brackendale.
Yeah.
The two highest denominated pure gold coins in the U.S. is, the American buffalo and the gold eagle.
There you go. E. Cummings. You know the poem, huh? Buffalo Bill's defunct. But what I want to know, how do you like your fair-haired, blue-eyed boy, Mr. Death? You remember that? That's an E.
No.
Yeah, it's a great poem.
Yeah.
Buffalo Bill's defunct.
All right.
is the name of the poem. Right. So anyway, okay. So he's going to go on to these metaphorics, if you will, of the wonderfully beautiful kite on page 89 and the vicious little boy, right? He's going to try to work with this completely here, right? And then he goes into the dream of, pheasants and Goethe's The Italian Journey. So again, you get an idea. Therapists today have no literary background. There are very few therapists that really have studied literature. It's very sad in a way because Freud was a master of reading literature. You know, Binswanger obviously was a master of reading literature. The relationship between the old debate between philosophy and poetry played out actively. These people actually read the poets very carefully. They could use it in sessions, right, in which the metaphorics, the transference, was really active in a certain way. Yeah, yeah. And you know, to me, one of the most subversive things one can do in this culture now is to have stacks and stacks of metaphors to confuse, right, in a sense, but at the same time speaking to the reality, right, of the moment, right? Yeah. So something happened in here, Mr. Jones, you don't know about what it is. Something happened in Mr. Kushner, Jeremy's friend, Jared Kushner, and he's going to get back on now. Yeah. Anyway, right. Anyway, so anyway, so think about this too. Yeah, yeah, about the use of metaphor and the rule of metaphor. Again, a great book on a great essay by Derrida, White Mythology, Metaphor and the Text of Philosophy, a very important essay in the philosophical tradition, and Paul Ricoeur's The Great Rule of Metaphor. You know, Ricoeur is a very clear writer. Derrida is not so clear, right? He's an obfuscator, but for a reason, I think. But, you know, we can talk about that too. Yeah. And again, going back to what we talked about last week and the week before, this in some ways goes back to the readings of the voice and the written, and the distinction in semiotic theory or theory of signs between indicative and expressive signs. Do we really have the need for expression, or is it all indications? And I'm working on this with a couple of people on a formal, if you will, indication in the early work of Heidegger, which is interesting too, because these people were, unlike the United States and a lot of the English tradition, in education, never trained in philology. Not that you should become a philologist or a stickler for language only, but in a sense, it really helps, in terms of the reading and the thinking going forward, the kind of materialistic hermeneutics, if you will, like Jameson proposes. If you read Jameson on interpretation in the beginning of the political consciousness, you'll see a lot of things. Jeremy, you taught the book last semester. You taught that essay? Yeah, that was the...
Yeah, from political conscious. The on interpretation is like the first 100 pages of the book.
Yes.
And then we only did after that we only did the we did the chapter on Joseph Conrad's Lord Jim.
Okay.
From that book.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah.
But yeah, the closest that English, I mean, there's a couple people in post-colonial that work with a lot of like Hindi and Arabic, and then there's an African-American critic named Ronald A. Judy, a Boundary 2 guy. He does a lot of philological work in Arabic, but the closest most English professors these days get to philology is just, if they do their due diligence, they'll look up a keyword in their study in the OED.
Well, that's Raymond Williams at work too.
Right.
Very
But
much.
what I'm saying is that the kind of, Auerbach'ian or Spitzer kind of thing where you learn 10 languages and really go hard, like they don't do that anymore.
Well, he wrote my Mises from memory. You know that.
Yeah.
He had very few books. He was in exile in Istanbul. So
well, Pangiotis says that Istanbul is the most beautiful city in the world.
That's not going to go over well with the Greeks. Don't tell my cousins that.
Yeah.
But anyway, it maybe in some ways. Yeah. So we can do a dream interpretation of what constitutes a beautiful city and what that kind of comment makes. So anyway, so the first thing is the dreams and the positioning of many of the references of the metaphors using, right? And Goethe's dream of pheasants. So you can see the bird, right? Right?
Yeah.
The little boy, this is little boy, and now the pheasants, right? Layout, right? Yeah. So the dreams really are of page 90 are of flying and floating, right? And he says, I would like to illustrate by means of an example that is often not starkly pictorial dreams that inspire psychiatric concern, but rather those dreams whose pictorial content and dramatic movement retreat before the presence of pure emotion. Okay? Again, it is a sign of psychic health when one's wishes and fears are predominantly objectified by the use of dramatic images, out of which, as we have seen, emotional content may then appear to rise, excuse me. In the following cosmic dream of one of our patients, and we're, the dream of Binswanger is this cosmic dream, not a Binswanger, of Aby Warburg, excuse me. Cosmic dream by one of our patients, emotional content is so dominant that even the exceedingly strong objectification, the image of the cosmos or universe no longer suffices to bind it pictorially. This is how deep this went with him. Here, the patient is not a bystander of the dreams, detached from his own body, nor that he completely immerse himself in the drama. The dream is, and this is Aby Warburg. I found myself in a wondrously different world, in a great ocean where I floated formlessly. The floor. From afar, I saw the earth and all the stars, and I felt tremendously free and light, together with an extraordinary sense of power. Right? Interesting, no?
Yeah.
And again, those of you interested in this, the oceanic feeling of Ferenczi and Freud that plays out very actively in the psychoanalytic tradition. Right. The dream is a dream of dying. This hovering without a form, the complete disillusion of his own bodily structure, the form, is not diagnostically propitious, and the contrast between the tremendous sense of power and the personal formlessness indicates that at the moment a deeper disturbance exists in the patient's psychic makeup, right? No longer part of the dream, but part of the psychosis. As such, when the patient speaks of the dream as a turning point in his life and finds its emotional content so fascinating that he relives it again and again to his root and his daydreams, preferring this feeling to every other content of life. Indeed, going so far as to, right, attempt to actually restore or remove himself, from life, right? When Gottef once said of the dream, I felt the healing power of night enveloping me or envelope me. That's interesting. The healing power of night, another poetic phrase. How different in style and structure is a dream such as that? Are not our dreams the benign gifts of God, and we must not apply them to our spiritual growth? He asks. Cannot be related to our dreamer. How different in style and structure in a dream such as that of our patient from this also cosmic dream of flying from Paul. Okay, so I'm going to just stop for a second. I've got to run to the bathroom. Please discuss.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll be right back.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
I'm going around. Everybody I know has it right now.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Like 2 or 3 people over it. I just like 3 actually.
3 people?
Yeah.
You didn't get it.
No. A few days ago. They all sound like that.
Yeah.
No voice.
I had it earlier in the spring, so I don't think I'm at risk. But I was in the same position where I had to teach. voice like that.
Yeah. I have to reread all this stuff. I didn't get
Me
that
too.
far.
Yeah, I kind of, whatever, I have 10 pages or so left.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's like
Yeah.
Heidegger,
Yeah, it's
like
very
at the
intense.
same time.
Yeah.
I feel like I have to come to these conversations and then go back to the reading again. I'm working backwards all the time. So I don't feel like I can come with much to contribute to the conversation.
Yeah.
So I'm always one step behind.
Yeah,
It does feel like that.
that's why we gotta go slow, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What were you saying? Yeah.
we're talking about
Rereading.
rereading this because it's
Reading?
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
not a
'cause
problem.
it's dense.
And it's very dense. It's very, I mean, I think this is very important
Yeah.
because what's being engaged are things we face, right,
Yeah,
ourselves,
yeah.
right? What does it mean to dream? What does a dream mean?
Right.
Right? What is existence in dreaming?
Yeah.
All, et cetera. The ontological structure replacing the anthropological and vice versa, right?
Right.
How do we go about this in many ways? And this is a seminal person, at least in terms of using the family inheritance in a very good way,
Mm.
building of a library,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
very interesting. Okay, so why don't we do this? We'll spend an hour next week if you want to read this again,
Yeah.
and Foucault's commentary. We'll spend an hour next week on this, and then we will go into the start, bad faith.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so you'll begin to see bad faith working out, and I can probably, hopefully, connect it with the images, right, of
Mhm.
Sartre, the
Yeah.
psychology of
Yeah,
imaging that he goes through, right?
Yeah.
The bad faith, right?
Yeah.
And the imagination of Peter. Okay, all right. Well, thank you. I'm sorry I'm not in better shape. I'll be good next week. I promise.
That's good,
I'm-
Yeah, feel it, man.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
No
better,
Montreal trips till you feel better.
Yeah, I hear you there.
Until you feel
Yeah,
better.
yeah. That's what happened, I guess. Yeah, who knows? Yeah.
All right, man.
Okay.
I had a hunch.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah,
Good will,
Thank you.
Michael.
yeah.
Thank you.
All right, bye, guys.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
And in
Thank
the
you.
meantime, keep track of your dreams, right?
Yeah.
Please do. That's a requirement to be in this quote
Class.
Go
institute.
get some good chicken soup, dude.
Right, I will.
Yeah.
Okay. Matzo balls.
Yeah.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Take it. Good to see you, Sean. Leslie, Farrell. Yeah. Miguel's back in Melbourne. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. Yeah. Just let me get rid of this. Yeah, this thing's vicious. What I got. Yeah.
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 They're going around there. I know a lot of people that have this, Michael.
Yeah.
Right now, yeah.
Okay.
3 people at my job having it.
Oh my God.
That's sick, right?
It's not contagious, I hope.
I think it is. But
Well, it is, but I think I've had it.
Oh,
I already had it myself.
It's good that
Okay.
blasted at me for last
This
week.
is an allergy, I think. This is
It could be, but
severe allergies. This is what
I mean, it's a
experienced.
bad, yeah, it's a bad time for allergies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me cut off the computer and get rid of it. Yeah. Recording. Have the recording. You don't want to record it anymore.
Yeah, that's what
What happened? Should I stop?
Yeah.
Yeah, stop recording. Yeah, great.